Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I see that some of you are new and some of you have been here before. A slightly different format today. We're going to get Diane to speak first, and I'll give her a little intro in a section. Then I'll open up the floor for some Q&A. And then for those of you that are familiar with the format, I will give you a bit of an update in terms of what we've been seeing in specific markets. Please, if you've got a question, just let us know, but I will create room for questions as we go along. I'd like to say thank you very much for Diane for joining us. She's got a lot. Jack wrote me a little bio. I'm not going to say how many years experience because I don't think that's a polite thing to do, but a lot of experience in the retail space. And she's a founding director of Springboard, which was established about 20 years ago, which specializes in delivering intelligence and insight on both retail performance and long-term retail trends to retailers, hospitality, landlords, and investors. Diane leads all of Springboard's insights and is a regular commentator and writes articles and reviews on topics in collaboration with the MPD Group. Diane co-authors an annual report on the eating out market and also recently led a £1 million 2-year project funded by the UK government based on enhancing customer experience in retail. She is one of only 12 people that is a senior fellow of the Institute of Place Management, and she was also named as one of the top world retail influencers in 2019. So she knows her stuff. So Diane, please, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here in virtual space, but a beautiful day it is too. So I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, because I've got a few slides that I thought I'd take you through, because that helps. Well, I think will help the discussion with. So let me just take this back to here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about Springboard, just in case you're not really familiar with what we do. And I wouldn't presume that everyone is. So if everyone can see that, I will just put it on slideshow. Can everyone see that? So as said, we were founded back in 2002, which sort of gives some indication of how much experience I've got. So we started Springboard when I was 10. So our driver, what we do is all about bricks and mortar retail. We track performance in bricks and mortar retail, and we provide data and insights in stores and in destinations. So it's not just about in-store experience, but also within destinations itself. And those destinations cover high streets, they cover retail parks, and they cover shopping centres. And really, we started the business because there really wasn't any intelligence or insights around what was happening in the wider bricks and mortar environment. There were quite a lot, even back in the day, and 20 years ago, there were a lot about in-store experience, but not so much about destinations. So that's really where we come in. So roll on 20 years, and we now cover the entire bricks and mortar landscape. The way we collect our data is through a network of automated counters that we install at different counting points across the UK that span high streets, retail parks, and shopping centres. And we have around about 4,500 of those in about 570 different destinations, coverage across the UK, from the south coast of North Scotland and east and west. And we've worked very carefully on making sure the distribution of our network of counters correlates to retail spending and the spending landscape. Otherwise, it really wouldn't be relevant as an index. And by virtue of the fact we have this network, we're able to push out insights around what is happening nationally. And hopefully you've seen those in the media a fair bit, looking at what's happening in terms of footfall at a national level or regional level, looking at key trading times. We also publish a lot of insights reports. They were mentioned. Our collaborative report with the MPD Group is a very well-read report about hospitality industry. And of course, that is one industry that relies virtually wholly, apart from the delivery element, which is a very small element still, on people going to bricks and mortar outlets. Now, I thought what I'd do here before we start on where we are now, which is quite obviously an incredibly interesting point in time, I thought I'd just give some context around where we were, because we were looking each year at a decline in footfall. We've actually been publishing our data since 2008. That is when we felt we had enough data to have a robust national and regional indexes. And so over that period, so the year-on-year change from 2008 to 2009, and over that decade, footfall in total fell by around 14.3% across all of our retail destinations. And that averages about 1.5% a year. And we would expect to see that drop because of the growth of online. And that's really created a new impetus, and it's drawn people out of bricks and mortar destinations, not just in making the transaction, but also in browsing. And that's really where the main impact certainly is felt initially. We do a lot of our browsing online, so we make fewer trips to our destinations, and then that's created a different type of trip. We go for longer, we go less frequently, we combine it with hospitality. So we would expect to see a drop in footfall of around 1.5% a year, and this is what we were experiencing. It was slightly worse in 2018, 2019, but around that mark. This is where we are now. So this graph tracks footfall year-on-year change from the first week of the year through to the end of last week, and you can see what's happened. So up until the lockdown started, we were tracking around sort of 2-3%. So it wasn't a great year, but it wasn't appalling. And then lockdown occurred, and now we're tracking about minus 80%. And this is unprecedented, and you can see that it just literally fell off a cliff. You can see a slight uptick actually from weeks 16, 17 and 18, which actually is a little bit concerning given we're still in lockdown. And it's something that we're saying that government should look at. We are in conversation with government, so we're passing our data to them, and they have our data. And that is something that's of concern to them. You may have seen the announcement last night when the scientist was talking about transport and use of transport. She was highlighting the fact that she's slightly concerned about the increased use of transport over the last few weeks. So this graph looks at daily data. So we're looking at year-on-year change by day. And you can see again that it's the same shape, but you can see how it changes from day to day. But again, it's this slight uptick over the last week. This graph here looks at the 3 different destination types, and this is actually really interesting because the orange line is retail parks, and we all know about the panic buying that ensued when we were just about to go into lockdown and everyone thought that they would never eat again. And because of the presence of large food stores on retail parks, and around 75% of all retail parks have a large food store on them, you can see how footfall actually stayed at quite a high level much longer than it did in high streets and shopping centres. And even since it's dropped back at the end of March, so we went into lockdown on the 23rd of March, and you can see where it dropped down at that level, it consistently stayed higher than high streets and shopping centres. And we would expect that to be the case. You know, we are shopping less frequently if we have to go out to stores, if we're not getting online deliveries. And so we would tend to head to those places where they have large food stores that can once again fulfill a weekly shopping trip that perhaps we haven't done in a fair while. Now this graph actually looks at high streets, and it segments high streets into 4 types. And these types of high streets are based on the way high streets are used by consumers. So rather than looking at high streets in terms of the provision in high streets, so whether it has a department store or how many retail stores it has, this is based on a segmentation around the usage, so essentially footfall. So the study that was mentioned, the 2-year study for the government, actually looked at town centres in terms of the way they're used, so the footfall pattern across the year, and then segmented types of town based on that. And the blue line is what we call our comparison towns. So that's our retail-oriented towns. So these tend to be larger towns and cities that are really driven by retail use and compete with other towns and cities on the basis of their retail offer. And you can see that they're actually performing less well than the other types of towns, which are holiday towns, and they tend, obviously, they are what they are. They're very much focused on tourism and a holiday accommodation. Multifunctional, which tend to be a town which has a blended function. So these towns which have a lot of commercial use, education, retail as well, but also residential. So they tend to have a much more blended use and have a flatter profile. And then speciality towns are towns that have something to attract people, either heritage, a historic town perhaps, or some of them are actually even coastal towns, seaside towns, but they attract a lot of day visitors. So, but the key thing here is that comparison towns, our major retail centres are lagging behind the other types of town. And you would expect that at the moment, because why would you go into centres that are predominantly retail when most of the stores are actually shut? What we're also able to identify very clearly is the percentage change in footfall in different types of towns. So what I've pulled up here are towns, now this is in April, so this is towns that have the lowest percentage change or lowest drop in footfall, and the towns that have the greatest drop in footfall. The towns with the lowest drop you can see on the left hand side, and you probably know some of them, but you probably won't know all of them. And the reason that that's the case is because they're all very small. And so what's clearly happening is those towns, our small local high streets, are being more protected, more insulated, more resilient at this time than our larger towns, which are on the right-hand side. And you can see the places that have had the largest drops in footfall are our big cities. So London features a lot. We have Cardiff, we have Liverpool, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Newcastle, Bristol, Belfast. All of these places have seen the biggest drops in footfall. And that's because if you're competing on retail, and some of these aren't just comparison towns, they might be multifunctional, but they have a strong retail offer that is largely shut at the moment. So clearly they're going to see a big drop in footfall. But what it perhaps suggests is how things are going to pan out when we move out of lockdown and the stores start to reopen, and we start up the economy again. And really, that's the question that no one knows the answer to, and is something that clearly is on everyone's lips. So we're thinking actually that the path to recovery may start from the small town. And we know that small towns have had huge amounts of challenges over the last few years in attracting and retaining shoppers. The occupiers, a lot of them who are independent, have suffered a lot because of business rates and rents, and they've lost out to larger centres. But actually, at the moment, those smaller places are more resilient. Will that continue? We don't know, but perhaps it will if people feel safer in smaller places. And then that brings into the discussion the issue of discounting. And obviously discounting has been hugely prevalent in the retail industry for a number of years now. And it seems to be the place of safety for most retailers. If things are getting tough, they resort straight to discounting. Will that be the case moving forward? Or rather, will it be something associated with what I call the 3 C's? So that's care, and that's care for both customers and staff. And that's about making sure they're safe. Community, we've all had I think we're all aware of this regenerated sense of community that's come about through the lockdown and through COVID. And also contribution. I think we're all much more aware of how much some people in society contribute, and therefore reward those businesses that contribute back to those people. So will the future be the 3 C's, or will it be discounting, and will it be small to large? And I think those are the issues that we're wrestling with at Springboard, and certainly we're starting to formulate some ideas. And the good thing about the footfall data is it's because it's immediate and continuous. We see the change on a day-to-day or even hour-to-hour basis, because we're actually collecting footfall data continuously 24/7. So really those are the issues that I would probably post up as a discussion point for today, and the things that we're looking at. So if I stop sharing now, hopefully I can go back to Brad.
Great, thank you for that, Diane. Does anyone have any questions that they want to start with before I ask 2 or 3? No? Okay, I'll ask then. Please, if you've got a question, please just jump in after I'm done. So I think the point you made about retailers possibly having this opportunity from being able to open up smaller locations or having better footfall presence in small locations. How much do you think the format of how stores are going to have to operate with queuing, limited numbers that are allowed into a store, potential temperature checks, all these sort of associated items that might come as part of our day-to-day shopping experience, number one, are going to affect what that sort of laydown actually looks like, and number two, is actually going to mean that we are still going to maintain most of our buying behavior digitally as it's been for the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks.
I mean, that's a really interesting point, and it's something that we're wrestling with at Springboard. We actually we've actually spent the last few weeks developing a service called Occupancy Alert, which is a service that will enable retailers to track the number of customers within stores and destinations in live time, in real time, and send out an alert when they reach a maximum occupancy. The thing is, what is the maximum occupancy? No one really knows that. But if you visualize a town centre in full operation, every one of those retailers will have a maximum occupancy. And what do they do when they reach it? And will that entail queuing outside stores in the high street? What complications and implications does that have for congestion and crowding in the high street? So that's a very live issue. A lot of retailers have said to me, actually, that they're facing issues around occupancy in terms of how many customers they need to have in store to make it viable. So one of our retailer clients said to me, look, we're a low margin business. We need footfall in our stores. If we have a maximum that we can allow in, we will not drive enough sales from those people at any point in time to make that store viable. So they're actually looking at what stores they may never reopen. Now, that will happen for some retailers. They will take the opportunity to not reopen if they can, because there will be some stores that are less viable than others. But it creates a change in operational behaviour. So we've long been advocated for a review of opening hours. There is a tendency for retailers to open very standard trading hours, and yet we know from footfall data that actually opening at 9 or 10 in the morning is the worst time of the day to open, because actually there are no people around. So what they should be doing is opening later in the evening when people actually were going out for meals and coffees and to bars and restaurants, and they weren't. So maybe this will force a change in that and spread the trading day out over a longer period to spread that demand out. We were at about 20% online spend before this. They're saying that that's obviously gone up, yet we don't have any concrete numbers because we're waiting for the ONS to deliver those. And we would expect those people who are now have migrated to online shopping, because they weren't doing it before, but they are doing it now, might stay with that. But I think there will be a hunger to get back into real life and bricks and mortar and human engagement. But people want to feel safe at the same time. And so there'll be issues for towns and cities that cannot control numbers and don't offer people opportunities to socially distance. Places where you can control numbers, retail parks and shopping centres, are likely to fare better, at least in the short term. The operators of those locations can actually limit numbers entering them and therefore help support the retailers at the same time. So there will be this graduated impact as we return to business. But certainly there will be more people shopping online because they've now got used to it.
How much do you think that the sort of process you've described about people doing the things or going to the places that they'll be going to is actually a function of not having to want to use public transport? How much do you think there's associated behaviour that's going to come into that? Because obviously you look at traditionally in retail over the last few years, the stores that have performed well have tended to be the big stores in the middle of town where the footfall is pretty good, and it's been the smaller stores on the high streets or in the smalling shopping centres that have lost their anchor tenants, which then really brings down the footfall that have been the struggle. You've almost got this counterintuitive bit, which is all the assets that were probably your worst in the short term are likely to be your best, whereas your best assets are now likely to be your worst, which figuring out how you solve that longer term is a bit of a nightmare.
It is, it's a real issue. I mean, the public transport issue is, you're right, it's absolutely key. And this is actually why retail parks have started to do really well over the last few years. You know, they're very accessible. You can drive in and out really easily, particularly if you've got a small family. You can get in and out of the car easily, you can get to and from the stores easily. They're all on one level. That makes it really easy. That accessibility has really played into retail parks, and then they were upgraded and uplifted in terms of their offer, and so they become very, very desirable places for people to go. And that is likely to continue even more so now, because literally you can socially distance in a retail park far more easily than you can in a big town or city. Shopping malls will have a similar advantage. You know, they have car parks associated with them very often, even in town centres, so you can drive to them. There will be a resistance to using transport. Hopefully there should be, in a way. I mean, it's impossible to socially distance on a bus unless there's only 5 people on a bus. And will they be able to run the bus route with 5 people on a bus? So there will be a migration back to car. or back to walk. And of course, walk is local, and they're the smaller high streets will prosper. Car is longer distance and possibly more outside of town centres, retail parks, or larger shopping centres that have substantial car parking. And that the urban areas with outdoor high streets are the ones that are likely to be more vulnerable.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what's going to happen next, or what we think is going to happen next. But obviously, retail as a sector has had challenges across the board for a number of years for a number of our major retailers. What if you're sort of looking a little bit more longer term and future gazing a bit more, what actually do these businesses need to be thinking about and doing structurally or organizationally to prepare for not just this next 6, 12, 18 months, but for what the future of retail probably looks like?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's absolutely fascinating, and it's almost like we've pressed the reset button on retail in a way. Over the last few years, there tended to be very much of a knee-jerk reaction to poor performing retail in terms of discounting. Now, that was the first place of safety for many retailers. They automatically leapt into let's cut our price and hopefully people will buy more. And to some degree that worked. People did buy a little bit more. But actually what happens is we get fatigued with discounting. So over a period of time we get as we all do, I'm an analyst, but I'm also a consumer, and I even get fatigued with discounting. I get used to 10% or 20%, and my standards start to rise, and I want 30%, and then I get bored with 30%, and I want 40%. And that is happening more and more now. And, I don't know about you, but I'm getting a continual stream of emails from retailers offering me huge discounts. And people get very tired of that, and they get very immune to it, and they expect it, and that almost becomes the benchmark price. So what retailers need to do is think out the box, and we talked about this a lot. All the retail industry has been talking about this, but actually, it's how you think out the box and what you're focusing on. And it was very much about pre-COVID. It was very much about creating that experience. Making sure that people could stay longer and do different things, and hospitality and beauty and leisure. And I think COVID has almost created a different type of demand. It's a demand for retailers to care and for people to feel part of a community, and for contribution to that community. And I think if retailers can demonstrate that they're actually doing that effectively, creating communities amongst their customers and also their staff, making you want to visit that retailer for more than just the product, because you actually believe in what they do and believe in them as a retailer. And then also contribute back into society, and thank those people that put themselves on the line. That is what they will start to draw people into their businesses. And of course, as we move back into the retail environment, it is about the experience. It is about the environment of the store itself. And for some retailers, being able to close stores will enable them to focus on a smaller network and give greater attention to what they're delivering to the customers within a smaller network of stores.
Great. Okay. Does anyone else have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on that. It's Mark Dugdale here. That point around local. Do you think that there's potentially more of an opportunity for smaller local businesses to benefit from this situation than the bigger retailers, given that there seems to be a real drive to try and support and protect local businesses within the local community? Certainly where I live in St Albans, there's a big push to supporting businesses as much as we can. And I would expect that to continue. So do you see this as potentially an opportunity for smaller businesses to do better than the big retail chains?
I do, absolutely. And I think we will remember those businesses that put themselves out to help us during this period of time through adapting their business model to, from a bricks and mortar in a store experience only to a delivery experience. And I think, we have become more community focused over this period of time. And I think the independent retailer is exactly what we're looking for in terms of that. So it's about being flexible. And of course, you have to meet the needs of your customers, and the price has to be right and the quality has to be good. But the ability to flex and the ability to shift a model is in the hands more of an independent retailer in a way, because they don't have such a super tanker to move, and therefore that helps them.
I think the next obvious question is, obviously I work for a large retailer, so how can we compete? How can we be as flexible as some of the independents to deliver on those 3 C's that you talked about?
I mean, that's really interesting because, from my experience working with all sizes of organisation, most organisations are pretty inflexible, and it's an inevitable consequence of size. And you have to work really hard at being flexible and remember, how it used to be back in the day. And communication is absolutely key. As retail businesses grow, they inevitably become siloed by function. So you have buying, you have ops, you have merchandising, etc., and everyone has their own interests and the interests of their function to look after. And it's almost creating bridges between those functions and mixing people up within the business. So rather than, it almost goes back to the seating plan in the office, if we still have an office, but have cross functions sitting next to each other, enable them to integrate more closely, and strip down the business and really focus on what the customer is looking at. And I think that's really where we come into, rather than, we all do it within our businesses. I think we have a tendency to say, well, actually, what does it mean for my business? How can I be more efficient in my business? How can I cut costs in my business? Turn it on its head and go, well, actually, what does the customer want? And work backwards through to the business. And I think if as businesses we do that, we will become more flexible.
Thank you.
Hello, Diana.
Hello.
Hi, it's Yusi speaking. I've got a question about the retailer who are online. For example, our company is an online travel agency. So do you think it will be a rebound after the lockdown?
Oh, travel, that's an interesting one. Travel, there's lots of talk about travel at the moment on the media, and how it's suffering the greatest downturn since the Second World War. So there is likely to be a rebound to some degree. The extent, in your sector particularly, I'm not a travel expert, so I can't comment on the travel sector per se, but it will depend on how safe people feel. It comes back to this safety element. People have this overriding desire to feel safe, and whatever they do, they want that's at the top and priority of their lists at the moment. So wherever they go, whatever they do, they'll be looking at safety first. So yes, there will be a rebound, but they will be in the confines of how safe they feel. Travel, they will want to travel but feel safe doing it. How can they do that? Well, I think in the short term it will be staycations or domestic vacations in the UK, rather than flying, because how can you socially distance when you fly? It's just absolutely impossible. Even if you socially distance until you get on the plane, once you're on the plane, it's virtually impossible. So there will be a rebound, but it will be slow, and it's about making people feel safe all the way through that journey.
I have actually seen quite a lot of specific data on that area, because it's something else I've been working on this week, which basically sort of reiterates that to a point. You are looking at this moment in time, approximately about 30% of people that are saying that they'd be willing to travel on a plane and go abroad at some point within the next 9 months, whether it's feasible to do that. And generally, the younger they are, the more comfortable they are with making that decision about doing that particular piece of activity. Obviously, any intent around cruising has been significantly impacted, given the challenges that have been seen there. But actually, what the two really interesting trends have been the staycation trend. People do want to take a holiday, and they will take one domestically, but also future planning for the summer of 2021. And that doesn't apply just to travel, but it applies actually to lots of other entertainment. Particularly, we're seeing it a lot in sport, where consumers are almost writing off this year in terms of where that happens to be. But if they can plan and secure things for what they will do next year in Easter, or particularly in the summer, we're seeing a lot of intent for, where there seems to be an expectation that we will be back, I'll put in sort of quotation marks, back to normal. That's where we're starting to see some sort of activity from consumers, but it's much more forward looking in terms of what they're thinking about.
Okay, cool.
Does anyone else have anything they want to ask?
I have a question. Do you think that some of the high streets will disappear completely? And what will happen to those towns that do?
I mean, the death of the high street's been talked about for a long, long time, and I've never really seen a dead high street. I mean, there have been high streets that are looking pretty sickly, but there are no high street. I've never seen a high street that's completely dead. And actually, I think so. They can never disappear. They will change. Some high streets will inevitably change, and they're going through that process. And have been going through that process for the past decade, really, if not more than that. I mean, I won't say how many years I've been working, but ever since I've been working, we've been talking about the threat of the high street, or threat for the high street of out of town, and this was before online, and then online. But actually, it was always still out of town that was the main threat. So I don't think high streets will disappear, but they will change, and the occupiers within them will change. I do have a feeling that actually there are some high streets now that have really become quite poor in terms of their offer, and actually therefore their rental levels have dropped to a degree that they haven't been for a while. And they, on the back of COVID and the community sense that has been engendered, I do feel that some independent retailers might start to take space up in those towns because they're actually quite cheap to occupy. So there may be a regeneration opportunity rather than a death of the high street threat, which would be quite heartening. And it's almost like we press the reset button on retail and high streets, and people are looking at it through a different lens now. But there will certainly continue to be changes.
And just adding to that point, a lot of retailers have moved more towards kind of leisure rather than retail, and coffee shops in particular seem to have grown massively. What happens with them now? Because can you sit and socialize? You know, so the whole thing about going to the high street was experience and socializing and sitting having a coffee and going to a store where the staff were very knowledgeable, and that was the reason to go. What happens to those coffee shops? And the other question is, does technology start to play a bigger role in the shops themselves, given that people are less keen to interact with shop assistants?
Yeah, I mean, the hospitality industry, the food and beverage industry grew enormously from 2015, and the last report we did with the MPD group that looked at the eating out market actually identified that the visits to eating out venues were not increasing at all, and yet the number of operators are still increasing. So that inevitably means that some operators are going to trade less well than they did, and we've seen fallout of that in the eating out market, and there will be some closures because, you know, a lot of the local independent coffee shops that we all have started to love will simply not be big enough to be able to socially distance. And that is quite heartbreaking for a lot of the people who've put their livelihoods on the line to start these. And there needs to be some thought, possibly from the landlords of these premises, how they can re-engineer these premises to create more space, possibly, and the retailers themselves, the operators themselves, think cleverly about how they can serve the local community with, you know, provide the coffee that people want, maybe with remote eating areas or eating outside more effectively with heating outside, something that gives them more space. But you're right, Mark, the high street has been very much based around leisure and hospitality over the last few years rather than pure retail, and that may change. There may be a contraction in the number of operators out there.
Diane, sorry, Richard Boyd here. Diane, do you have a sense of how landlords are reacting and planning around this scenario?
I mean, landlords tend to be the end of the line for everyone, really. So, you know, the retailers are trying to seek rental holidays and rental payment breaks. And some are pushing back very hard on that. Some have been much more flexible. I know of some more independent landlords who are being very flexible, because really property is a long-term game. You know, it's not 3 months, it's not 6 months, it's not a year, it's 20 years and 25 years. So they need to take a long-term look at it. And that is what I think a lot of landlords will do, and they're going to have to do. But there are some who are being quite intransigent because they're in difficulties themselves. So it is a blend, but it's about communicating and working together and collaborating and trying to do it for the benefit of the whole. And that's quite difficult in high streets because you get so many landlords. There's so many ownerships in the high street that it's always been quite difficult to bring those owners together. And business improvement districts have a real role to play there because they are sitting at the fulcrum of that. They can engage with all the different landlords in a high street and start to bring them together around a table and talk about how they can work together to protect that town centre or that high street. So there is a very huge variance in approach from landlord to landlord at the moment.
Thank you.
Great. If there's not anyone else, no. All right. Well, Diane,
Can
thank you
I
for
ask a quick question? Sorry, Father. Hi, it's Marcus Love here.
Go,
Just very
Marcus.
quickly. Hi, guys. I'm an investor, so I'm not really in your world directly. My question is around online and bricks and mortar. So if I look at Lululemon, who have a very good online offering and use this in China to great effect, and have now reopened their stores there, and their growth at the moment is coming from online retail and menswear, for example. And I compare that to Primark without an online offering. How in the UK will people adjust to the new landscape? Will people like Primark consider doing an online offering, or is that not part of what you're hearing?
I mean, Primark is a unique case, really. Primark has a special issue that their price point is so low that for them it's very expensive for them to deliver online. It's almost impossible for them to make online viable. They've never been online, so they don't have a platform, so they would have to create a platform from scratch, which in some ways is good because they don't have legacy issues associated with an out-of-date online platform. However, driving enough sales from an online platform and making it viable financially when you're selling t-shirts for £4 is really tricky, which is why they've always stayed away from it. And so that's why they've always gone for massive stores, because they need the size of store to have the volume of purchase to make them viable. They can't trade viably out of small stores. It just doesn't work. So that is quite an issue for Primark, but they have a huge following. And I think the issue for Primark might be actually more about throwaway fashion and whether that is sustainable in the long term, and whether people's thoughts around community and homegrown products move away from the demand and the desire to buy throwaway fashion. That was before COVID. That was very much the narrative, and I know they were focusing quite a lot of attention on responding to that. And that may actually escalate as we come out of lockdown. You know, what we haven't really been buying throwaway fashion to a large degree while we've been at home because young people haven't been going out at all. Will they go back to that? Who knows? Maybe they've had a reset of their own, and maybe they'll think, actually, I don't need to buy as much. And so that's something that Primark will need to address. But it's certainly an issue for Primark. But they are anchors, and they are in their own right. I mean, we've seen it in our footfall data. When a Primark opens in a high street, footfall will go up by 20 or 30% overnight. And when, so it's huge. They have a huge pull.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because actually, if you look at Boohoo in comparison, who are producing record numbers in terms of online sales out of that category, and actually looking across the sector that seems to have been the most impacted, and I'll talk about this a bit in a few more minutes, is retail and clothing, particularly women's clothing, for most people has been an absolute bloodbath. It is quite possibly, certainly from an online commerce point of view, the worst performing category of the last 6 or 7 weeks, which shows the least sign of turning around anytime soon, which is a challenge for a lot of people. But you still have the exceptions in there, and Boohoo is definitely one of those. And it is interesting with the Primark example going, even if they had minimum order values of 30 or 40 pounds to make sure that transactionally you can make a margin on the transaction for the whole piece of putting it together rather than the product, whether that wouldn't have put them in better stead in terms of operating even a slightly different model. I mean, I don't know what their AOVs for an average transaction in store are, but it is interesting looking at how hard that they've been hit, or even at this point in time, leveraging third-party distribution. because their prices are so low, you could imagine that people would be willing to pay the extra cost of delivery for the Primark item, because fundamentally it's still a cheaper alternative than buying anything else.
The problem you've got is returns, of course, and that's always been the nightmare for any online retailer, particularly when you're talking throwaway fashion, because it's immediate. You know, so what happens with all of the online who deal with Boohoo, and they all have it, they have massive returns, and they actually have to just get rid of them half the time. They can't package them up and resell them in enough time to make anything of them. And so, of course, logistically, for Primark to sell 30 or 40 pounds, that might be a minimum order value, but actually that would take 2 hours for someone to put that order together in their warehouse. They have to carry so much product to get that 30 or 40 pound order. Their warehouses have to be so enormous. The whole logistical issue for them would be so huge, it would be so expensive, and their ROI on it would be so minimal. Actually, that's probably why they've always stayed away from it. And Boohoo are, as case in point, they've done really well, and that's about, you know, pushing product, casual gear, and, you know, all the Zoom calls we're all doing. Everyone wants to look nice from the top. On the top, they're probably not selling a huge amount on the bottom, because you can wear what you like on there, but it's all about what's on the top.
Do we know that? Do we know that Boohoo continues to trade well over the last 7 weeks?
Yes,
They are?
very, yes.
Okay, that surprises me, because I totally agree that this is going to accelerate the move towards sustainability, buying a little bit less, thinking about what you buy, and buying better quality.
Is it going to do that for their core market though, Mark? Is the issue, right? If you look at the teenage market who's predominantly buying that stuff, is that really? So for a lot of people, I agree that's probably true, but is it true for their core audience? Because we've been talking about that for a long time, and actually
maybe
the sales data says something completely different. The sales data of Primark and Boohoo, you know, always, we talk about the sustainability thing going on for a while, but actually you look at all the record growth in retail, it is from all those guys who do this fast fashion crap and mass produce stuff that we don't necessarily need at that volume. But they're all the fastest growing businesses and have been in that clothing space for 2 or 3 years.
But you've got a problem, because the youth of those guys who are now buying it will move out of that sector shortly. They will go up. And it's whether the young kids who are now being much more sustainable in their thought processes, and they're talking about, you know, Greta Thunberg and climate, you know, looking after the climate, whether they will step into that space. If they don't, they have a problem, because that window of opportunity is very narrow.
Agreed. Great. Anyone got anything else they want to ask? No. Okay. So Diane, thank you very much. For those of you that wanted, there is a recording of this that we will share around afterwards. I know there's some people that couldn't attend.